From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. I know we have listeners from outside of Oregon who may have never experienced a spring in Southern Oregon, and it's a shame because it is home to some of the most wonderful pollinators in the state, and that's because of the unique plant communities that exist in Southern Oregon. And I also know we've got Oregonians who love going down to Southern Oregon this time of year, but have to stay home because of stay-at-home orders. To try and remedy the situation, I've invited Suzie Savoie onto our show. She's the co-owner of Siskiyou Ecological Services and Klamath Siskiyou Native Seeds. She's also the conservation chair for the Siskiyou chapter of the Native Plant Society of Oregon, and she's also the co-author of Native Pollinator Plants for Southern Oregon. Now, Suzie's going to tell us a little bit about how you can establish some of these wonderful native plants in your garden. She's going to talk about some of her favorite plants that bloom at this time of year. And finally, she's going to talk about some restoration projects, places that you can actually visit to see how you can integrate these various elements of a native plant community into the landscapes that you're trying to manage. I'm excited to bring this episode to you right now because I know many of you are thinking about doing some work in your garden, thinking and trying to get some ideas about how to take your garden to the next level. And I really think for Southern Oregon, this episode is going to really hit the mark. Hope you enjoy the show. Go. And so are you ready to go?
I'm ready.
Okay. Hi, Suzie. Everybody's cooped up inside right now. Can you walk us through some of the pollinator plants that are likely blooming in Southern Oregon at this moment?
Well, one of my favorite spring blooming plants is Pacific houndtongue or Cynoglossum grande. It's perfect for a dry shade environment, which is kind of a hard niche to fill for a lot of people in gardens and restoration projects. Houndtongue, it has beautiful, lovely, large leaves, and it's a robust plant. It has kind of purple, bluish flowers that dangle. It's a larval host plant for the houndtongue woolly bear moth or the wild forget-me-not moth. But bumblebee queens really relish the flowers because when the bumblebee queens are coming out of hibernation in the spring, the Pacific houndtongue is usually in bloom. And so I see a lot of early pollinator species using the flowers, including butterflies such as their orange tips right now. So I really love Pacific houndtongue, fawn lilies right now. In Southern Oregon, we have a purple flowered Henderson's fawn lily, Erythronium hendersonii, that is highly attractive to bumblebees. Lots of various Lomatium species, Lomatium utriculatum, Lomatium dissectum. These are called biscuit roots or Lomatium. California Lomatium is Lomatium californicum. And those are all starting to bloom right now. They're members of the parsley family, and they're larval host plants for the Anis swallowtail butterfly. And the flowers are highly attractive to lots of small insects, like really small bees. And so the Lomatiums are really great. Shooting stars are blooming right now, the dodecathions, although the genus has now been changed to Primula. But locally, we have Dodecathion or Primula hendersonii. Those are pollinated by buzz pollination by bumblebees. Trilliums are blooming right now in the spring, and they're pollinated by various species of pollinators. But one of the fascinating facts about trillium is that both ants and yellow jackets disperse the seeds. They're attracted to a lipid-rich structure that's attached to the seeds. And I've actually collected trillium seed and had yellow jackets literally coming after the seed and taking them away and dispersing them. There's some really great research papers about that if people are interested in looking into that more. So, yellow jackets are dispersed as a trillium seed along with ants. Another one of my favorite spring blooming plants is silver lupin. It's starting to bloom right now. It's got gorgeous silver leaves, and it's really drought tolerant. Has purple flowers. It's a larval host plant for some butterflies, and it's highly attractive to bumblebees and other insect pollinators. It's great for a super dry area, or rocky site, or just a xeriscape garden. And then, of course, we have California poppies blooming. Balsam root is starting to bloom, one of our native sunflowers. Lots of great stuff starting to bloom right now.
And really a diverse set of shapes and colors there. I can, some of the lomatiums in yellow and some of the purples. Like these are plants that could be a lot of us are used to seeing them when we go on a hike, but these are things that could be established in your backyard. I imagine there are some people who are able to see some of these pollinator species and this kind of diversity of flowers cooped up in their backyard right now. They're able to see some of these things.
Exactly. Yeah, I grow a lot of lomatiums just right outside my back door, and right now is a great time to watch some of the first Anna's swallowtail butterflies I've been seeing come out. And if you grow these species out, in your yard, you can get really great photos of the larvae on the plants. And so I actually have on my blog at climatiscuseeds.com, we have a great new blog about lomatiums, and there's photos of the Anna swallowtail caterpillars that are on various species of lomatium, and some of those I took, right on my own land or out hiking. So, yeah, when you're growing native plants, you're bringing a little bit of the wild into your backyard and bringing nature home.
And I think about some of these things like bumblebees are, you might see on a variety of plants, but things like the lomatium, you do start to see, in addition to these caterpillars, some very small little bees that are delicate, and you have a nice umbel like that, they're going to spend a little bit of time kind of walking across, and you get a chance to really see them in a way that you might not unless you're out in the wilds.
Yes, that's really true. And, there's usually one umbel of lomatium is just a buzz with lots. They're usually really small insects, kind of hard to see and identify, but they're usually just buzzing with lots of different pollinators. And that's one of the great things about growing lomatium is that, a lot of people are growing species that are attracted to larger pollinators that are maybe easier to identify, like bumblebees, but lomatiums provide a really great role for some of the more underlooked pollinator species, while also providing larval host plants for some of the more charismatic, larger butterflies.
Now I know we're recording this from my home, and we were just commenting. I had to close the door because I could hear somebody next door doing yard work, and this is a great time. I can imagine to start to think about incorporating some of these native plants into your garden. Tell us a little bit about what are some of the tricks to getting them established. We had a previous episode with Linda Boyer describing these plants are not like a lot of exotics, but they can be established successfully. You can have beautiful gardens. Can you tell us a little bit about some of those tricks?
Right. Yeah. Native plants, they run the gamut. Some are really easy to grow and germinate from seed, and some are really slow. They can take years to get a flowering species. Others are maybe perhaps more easily grown through division, through root division, but they're all worth trying. So some of the annuals, you can actually, that don't need long, cold, moist stratification requirements. You can grow them in the spring. But most of our species, it's best to sow the seeds in the fall or early winter and let the seeds sit out over the winter, exposed to all the cold weather conditions, the freeze thaw, the snow, the rain, and that helps break down the seed coat and allow for springtime seed germination when they're ready to germinate. That can also be mimicked in using the refrigerator method, and I do have more information about that on my website. But some species require really long cold moist stratification, and other species such as like Oregon sunshine or coyote mint, they only require about 30 days, and so you can meet those requirements in a shorter time. So species like Oregon sunshine And codemon are good species to start out with if you've never grown native plant from seed. But I experiment with all kinds of different species. I actually really even love growing native plants that are bulb species that can take a long time to grow, like species such as camas. You can direct sow camas on the ground, in the fall or winter, just sow the seeds directly on the ground, or you can still grow them in containers and grow out the bulbs for a year or two and then transplant the bulbs out. Camas is not only a really important cultural plant, but it also, because it was a major food source for native people, but it also is a really great pollinator plant too. A lot of insects are highly attractive to camas. And once you get it established, to me, it's as easy to grow as a daffodil. So why not grow one of our native, beautiful, lovely bulbs such as camas? And it adds a lot of beautiful color. Growing native plants from seed is definitely a lot different than growing, squash or beans in your garden. But once you learn the tricks of the trade and you kind of get the rhythm of starting the seeds sowing the seeds in the fall and the winter, then you start to kind of get in the mode of it and it becomes second nature. But each species has different requirements. The seed packets that I sell on my website, each species, the packets have germination requirements written on the packet so that you know what you need for that specific species. But that information can be hard to come by. Not all species, I do sell species that are, only available in very minimal amounts, so they haven't been researched much. So I actually have to do a lot of the research on my own. I grow out a lot of species so that I can understand what the germination requirements are. But there are a lot of great resources online for more commonly grown native plants that have been researched over time that, you can get really good germination protocol information for online.
I imagine it's like anything. There are some simple things that get you started, and then you just get the bug, and you want these challenges to plants that are a little more difficult and a little bit more rare to establish. What would you say are some of the plants for someone who's just starting out, their first excursion into native plants? What are some Southern Oregon species that would be really a slam dunk, easy to kind of get started?
Well, like I said, Oregon sunshine, so Eriophyllum lunatum, codemon, which is Monardella odoratissima. Those two only take about 30 days cold moist stratification. When you get into a little bit longer period, between 60 to 90 days, buckwheat species, some of our native buckwheats are considered, pollinator power plants because they're larval host plants for so many different butterfly species, but also the flowers are just so attractive to so many different pollinators as well. And some of our native buckwheats, so these are Eriogonum species like sulfur flower buckwheat or that's Eriogonum umbulatum. Eriogonum compositum is arrowleaf buckwheat. Those are really great for dryland sites or rock gardens or xeriscaped areas, unirrigated areas. Obviously in Southern Oregon, we have a lot more dryland habitat than in northern parts of Oregon. So buckwheats are a great part of a xeriscaped garden environment and for habitat restoration as well.
One thing I would say with the buckwheat is people are so used to the cultivated buckwheat, but I remember, any drive through southern or central Oregon, you just see at certain times of year it's just miles of it, and there was such a beautiful assortment of them at the Master Gardener's demonstration garden in Bend. I was really amazed at the diversity of buckwheats we have in the state.
Yeah, the buckwheats are really diverse. Yeah, a lot of people, and I use the typically cultivated annual buckwheat as the cover crop in my vegetable garden. That's very different from the wild native buckwheat that we're talking about. A lot of them are subshrubs or have a woody component, like sulfur flower buckwheat can be kind of woody at the base. Others are just perennials that completely die back to the ground and come back up in the spring. And yeah, Southern Oregon is really rich in Eriogonum species, and they run the gamut from various different flower colors and and plant sizes, and they bloom at different times. So, you could grow, 5 or 6 different buckwheats in your garden, and they'll bloom and, different times of the year, which is really nice. And
Wow.
they add, a variety of flowers through the season. Some are pretty early blooming, some are really late blooming. So, it's kind of nice to have a continuation of wild buckwheat available for pollinators.
Okay,
And
I threw you off. You were on a roll of plants. Keep going.
yeah. So I'll talk about. So I've kind of talked a little bit more about species that are good for like dryland habitat, which obviously we have a lot of in Southern Oregon. So but a lot of the species that grow in dryland habitats, it can be a little bit more challenging to grow in containers and nursery pots. Species like deltoid balsam root, like Balsamorrhiza, deltoidea, or narrowleaf mule deers. Those are great. There's some, small plants in the sunflower family. They provide, large, showy flowers. But because they're so drought tolerant, they have a tendency to get overwatered in the nursery environment. So you really have to be careful of how you, what kind of drainage you have in your soil mixture. So just good drainage, trying not to overwater them. But for plants that like more moisture, they're a little bit easier to grow in the nursery environment. The plants that like dryland habitat, you can also direct seed them and try it that way without having to, worry about keeping them dry enough in the nursery environment. But there's a lot of plants that, that we grow in our gardens that are actually from higher elevations, moist habitat. So horse mint, Gastigia or Testifolia, that plant is powerhouse for pollinators, and it's really easy to grow from seed. It's easy to grow in the garden. So that's one that I would recommend for beginners as well. Horse mint, it's a member of the mint family, but it doesn't spread by rhizome like a culinary mint. It's a perennial, stays in place, and it's highly attractive to pollinators. We have 2 different native coneflowers here that are in the genus Rudbeckia. So they're related to a black-eyed Susan that people might be familiar with from buying at a local nursery. We have Rudbeckia occidentalis, which is the western coneflower, and Rudbeckia glaucescens, which is only native to Southwest Oregon and Northwest California. And they're both coneflowers. One has really showy, the waxy coneflower has really showy yellow ray petals that are just big and gorgeous. But the cone itself has, lots and lots of flowers in it. So a lot of pollinators love the coneflowers. The Rudbeckia occidentalis, the western coneflower, does not have the showy yellow ray flowers. It just has the cone, but it's still just as attractive to pollinators. And then also species like goldenrod, solidago, those are really easy to grow from seed. And asters also, we have one of the common species we have down here is leafy black asters, Symphyotrichum foliaceum. And that doesn't need any cold, moist stratification, so it's easy to grow. Same with broadleaf lupin or Lupinus latifolius. You can grow that in the spring, even just in the greenhouse environment. So there's a lot of diversity of species, and I think the best thing to do is just make sure that you provide a diversity of flower structures, plants, and bloom time. So you have bloom from early season all the way through late season.
I was thinking the asters and the Rudbeckia. I mean, I've heard some people talk about some native plant communities being very timed to the moisture. So you have like a big flush of species that will go in the spring, and then, if you were a typical garden, you would like to have something in bloom the whole time. But I guess there are ways to play around with some of these species so that it's a little unnatural in a way, I guess, that you can keep something in bloom the whole time by just being careful with your plant selection.
Yeah, and that's something that, obviously in the restaurant, if you're doing, more broad scale habitat restoration, you're not going to be able to use some of these methods. But in the backyard garden, you can deadhead species like goldenrod and asters and horsemen. A lot of the more moisture-loving species, if you after they bloom and you deadhead them, they'll bloom through the rest of the, through the rest of the summer until fall arrives. So that's one of the advantages too. Obviously you have to irrigate the species that you're bringing from more moist areas into your backyard. So you have to use water to keep them going, but they do provide, more diversity of flowers throughout the year because you can deadhead them and keep them blooming.
Fantastic. Well, tell us a little bit about, so I can just imagine that to keep to be able to provide enough seed on so many species, it must be a very challenging operation that you have to run. How many plants do you grow? And tell us a little bit about what's involved with collecting the seed and propagating the seeds so that people can use them both for their backyard purposes and for restoration.
Well, my focus is primarily on seed collection, although I do grow some species out on my own land for seed increase. So I currently offer about 200 species of seed packets through my online seed sales, but the inventory fluctuates because I do collect seeds through permit on BLM land and Forest Service land, and then I also have a lot of different kind of like a network of private properties that I also collect seed on. And so the inventory fluctuates throughout the year. Obviously, I have a lot more available in the fall, and then, some species sell out, and then I have a little bit less this time of year when, when I'm just kind of gearing up to start doing the next round of seed collection. But I also provide seed for large grow outs for restoration projects. For example, I've been recently collecting seed for large seed increase fields for what will be the Klamath dam removal project on the Klamath River, where they're going to need, thousands of pounds of seed for habitat restoration. But I spend a lot of my time, hiking and driving into the backwoods, into areas where, I've been doing this for, over 15 years. And so I know certain spots, where I can go to sustainably and ethically harvest, seed. And then I have to do a lot of the seed cleaning and the packaging. I have a clipper seed cleaning machine that I use to help clean seed, but seed cleaning is a pretty laborious thing to do. So I encourage people to try to collect seed on their own and clean seed and also just collect from their own local areas. The one thing that I really enjoy doing is just providing really localized seed for people. And I envision that over time, it would be really great if there was a larger network of people providing localized seed throughout the country for their specific regions, so that people have access to local native plants for their area. Since locally sourced seed are generally the most successful for that specific, location. So yeah, I think it's and I also provide, I do grow native plants, potted native nursery plants for particular projects as well. From various things from, vineyards that want to have pollinator plants in their area, or just backyard gardeners or large scale restoration projects. It's a very diverse field to be in, and I just love it because it allows me to be in nature and to work with nature and help not only promote native plant conservation and pollinator conservation, but just a love of wild species and a love of, what we have here in the beautiful Pacific Northwest.
Well, that's fantastic. And I can imagine it's a much more complicated, like I was just thinking about the seed cleaning you were describing is like, it'd be one thing if you had to clean one seed from one species and you could kind of optimize it. But when you're having to deal with plants that are indeterminate, that have big seeds, small seeds, and all sorts of like paraphernalia for protecting the seed, it must be a real challenge trying to kind of maintain, do things efficiently so that you can, I imagine for some of these restoration projects, you really have to get a lot of seed, but at the same time keep that diversity of plants up.
Yeah, and I think diversity is really important, and it can be difficult sometimes, especially when there's a lot coming in at one time. Especially when like a lot of different berries are all ripening up at the same time, and I use an augmented blender, to blend the seeds without the blades, so the blades are covered in a rubber, and so that you can kind of blend the seed and separate the seed from the flesh, but it's a lot of time, just cleaning seed and keeping track of all the different species. One of the things I always tell people who are trying to learn how to collect seeds is just make sure you get all the data that you need at that time. So, make sure you write down the name, the date that you collected it, and the location, all that information, because you will need it later. And it's really important to keep track of the timing because, every year is different. This year, Southern Oregon has been experiencing a bit of a drought, and things are a little bit ahead of schedule. And it's always, you don't want to drive all the way somewhere and then be too late to collect the seeds. So I keep really detailed records of when I've collected seeds, in the past throughout the years, and so I can look back and see when do I need to go out and start harvesting and start collecting that seed. Just paying close attention to when things are going to be ready so that you don't miss it. But inevitably, somebody might want one specific species, just a small amount of something, and I might miss it because it's just sometimes hard to get the timing right.
Wow. Well, that I imagine you every collection, your knowledge of the natural history of these plants expands. Just that process of tracking phenology through the variation in years, but also just the act of actually trying to propagate them your brain must be full of plant facts.
Yeah, I mean, I do appreciate that aspect of it. I feel like you really get to understand a plant when you collect the seed, clean the seed, you're really looking at it really closely, you're connecting with it, and then you grow the plants from that, like through the whole process, like you really start to understand, just the ecology of the plant and the phenology, everything about it. And so it just helps you really, just understand just the intricacies of how plants grow and what they need, and all the different requirements they have. And then also one of the things that I find really helpful is that when I actually go out and spend a lot of time with the plants in their native natural environment, that helps me really understand how they're going to grow in cultivated environments. So really siting the plants appropriately in the garden environment, so that if something really thrives with like sharp drainage or like really rocky areas, you need to be able to mimic that in the garden setting or find the right location. Whereas if something really it grows in a wet meadow, you're going to need to make sure that you have plenty of moist area for that to grow and to thrive. So, once you really get to know a plant, it makes it easier to grow them. So I think that's key.
Well, this is great. Let's take a quick break, and I want to come back and just I know there's a lot of examples of kind of these restoration and gardening principles in practice. I want you to walk me through a couple of these around Southern Oregon so that people get a picture of how this all kind of ties together.
Okay.
Okay, well, we're back, and we were just talking at the break. The one thing I'm always kind of, I know in the Oregon Bee Atlas, the volunteers that we have, the Siskiyous just have high levels of plant endemicism. It's really, if you're interested in native plants, you're kind of located in the epicenter of the coolest plants in Oregon. But you also have a guide, a book. Can you tell us a little bit about the book? And
Yeah, I met Tom Landis, was one of the co-founders of
Ah,
Southern Oregon Monarch Advocates
right.
through volunteering for monarch advocacy. We met through SOMA, through Southern Oregon Monarch Advocates, and through our mutual love of native plants, we decided that we wanted to write an introductory guide to native pollinator plants for Southern Oregon. So we wrote a pretty simple guide that we wanted to not be too overwhelming for people that are new to the concept of gardening with native plants. So it's called Native Pollinator Plants for Southern Oregon, and it was written by myself and Tom Landis. And it just walks through some of the species that grow locally in Southwest Oregon that you can find either at nurseries or you can find plant material for, like seeds or plants, so they're not totally obscure, or that are just more easy to grow, things that maybe people are a little bit more familiar with or they've at least seen in the wild. And then just basic information about their flowering time, growing requirements, things like that, and just a description of the plant. And then we break it up into early flowering, mid-season, and late season flowering, so that people can maybe pick a few out of each time frame and grow like a diversity of flowering species through the year. So yeah, the idea was just to start really providing some introductory material, and it's been really popular for people who are just new to native plants, don't know anything about native plants, and just really want to start growing native plants for the benefit for pollinators, and but also just for folks who maybe are really familiar with native plants. Maybe they hike a lot and they see them out in the wild. They might even know some of the names, but they haven't experimented yet with growing them. And so, it's helpful for people to just have some really basic information to start with. And then from there, of course, people now want us to expand on it and make a much larger book. And it could be, like you said, we live down here in Southwest Oregon, in the 60 Mountains. It's definitely a hot spot for botanical biodiversity. And so we just have so many different species that we can grow, and it makes it really exciting. Every year I try to grow something new and add to my own native plant garden so that I just have more diversity, and it really shows. The more diversity you have, the more pollinator diversity you have, and the more insect species can use the plants that you grow. And so, I think providing those local guides is really good. And hopefully over time, other people in different areas throughout Oregon will also create localized guides like ours for their particular regions too.
Absolutely. And just a reminder to guests who it was a while back, but we did have Tom on the show, but it was maybe a year or two. Worthwhile checking back with Tom, but I think he's talking about the guide there. It's really something you don't want to miss, especially, and as soon as these travel restrictions lift, you want to be in Southern Oregon in May.
Yeah. And I will say, I think you were going to link to the guide. We do sell physical copies of it at cost for printing, but we offer it for free online as a PDF for people to see, so that we just want to disseminate this information, and just get it out there so that people can just start growing native plants, because a lot of people are really starting to learn the benefits of growing native species, because a lot of us have grown some highly hybridized plants that you buy in the nursery, and like nothing, some of them, no insects will even use them at all. And so when you grow native plants, you're just providing such a higher level of habitat, and so just getting that information out there is important.
I do remember a prior episode with Gail Lungalato where I think she did a poll of master gardeners in terms of aesthetic qualities of certain plants, and she lined it up with their ecological function. They were kind of mismatched. And I know on that episode, Gail was talking about really trying that there is a market and there is an appetite with a little bit of education in terms of ecological function. Some of these plants may not meet the expectations of a traditional garden, but like you say, as soon as you sort of tune in to the small insects on the lomatium, it's like it's a little explosion of life that's so worth it.
Yeah, and one of the species I saw a lot of seed of is the Pacific hound tongue, and I grow a lot of it on my own land. I have 24 acres that I've homesteaded with my husband for about 20 years in the 60 Mountains, and so I've just really increased the amount of Pacific hound tongue on our land. And I'd never heard of the hound tongue woolly bear moth or the forget me not moth before, and then I started seeing the caterpillars on the plants. And so when you grow the plants, you tend to see them. You tend to see which insects use them more than you might when you're, say, out on a hike, because you could sit
Yeah.
outside with your cup of tea or morning tea and just really observe. So you kind of have more time to really sit with them. And so I started seeing the caterpillars all over the hound tongue and was like, oh. And then I started seeing the adult moth and started seeing it on my showy milkweed plants, and then started noticing it nectaring on other species because it's a day flying moth. And so, and it's actually quite a showy moth too. And so, you really, when you grow the plants, you just definitely, you get a little bit more of an intimate relationship with them, and you start noticing what insect species are using them that you might not see when you're out on a hike. I mean, obviously a lot of us spend some time really sitting with plants in nature when we're out on a hike, but just having them in your own backyard can make a big difference on your understanding of what insects use them. But I would say that that's different, depending on where you are. Like the insect use varies from location to location too.
Well, let's talk about where people can view some of these, some examples of successful establishments. So, tell us a little bit about if you have some examples of some native plant gardens in Southern Oregon, and sort of the concept behind them, and describe what they look like.
Well, if folks hike the Pacific Crest Trail through Southern Oregon up near Mount Ashland, I actually was involved in a project up there where the PCT goes right along a private property, and the landowner had done a lot of kind of just machine work, doing some hardscaping, and there was just like basically just blank soil to work with, and he wanted to turn it all into native wildflower meadows. And he already had native wildflower meadows already on his property lower down, but he wanted to create this. He basically wanted to take the opportunity of kind of unfortunate soil disturbance and make sure that it wasn't colonized by invasive species, and just really turn it into a wildflower meadow. And so I collected seeds for him for about a year, focusing on the 60 Crest area where his property is located. And I guess this is in year 4 now, and it's completely just one large wildflower meadow all around his place. And it's really nice because he's allowed, the hikers hike right through there, and there's a little picnic bench and everything. And so people can sit right there and see the native planting. And, it's really great to see that people who, or take an unfortunate situation where maybe they have done some heavy machine work or some disturbance of some kind, and try to actually make the best of it and utilize the opportunity to get native plants established, because site preparation is really important. And, some of the other projects that I've worked on have needed a lot more site preparation. A project that I did on the Klamath River where there was a lot of invasive star thistle and Dyer's woad. So it took a lot of time to, and it's still a continual process of, weeding the area, trying to limit the amount of invasive species that were there. We actually used a propane torch method there, where in the fall, after fire danger was gone, we burned off the duff and last year's, grass thatch, and prepped the site using a propane torch, and then seeded into that area. But still, a lot of these sites, you still have to go back to them and maintain, in some sites, you're not going to get 100% native. That can be a difficult thing to achieve, but you can at least, maintain them by trying to weed out the invasive species and keep on, maybe trying to, everybody's kind of got a different perspective on how much effort they want to do in the maintenance. Some people just want to get native seeds native seeds and native plants established, and then if there's non-native species mixed in, they're okay with that just because they've increased the amount of native species there, which is still beneficial. Other people really want to maintain it a lot and try to keep the non-native species at bay and just try to keep it as pure native as possible. And then also, like I said, I've worked with some large wineries. I've actually recently started working with a cannabis farm, which I'm really excited about because the hemp industry down here and the cannabis industry has been really quite ecologically destructive on a lot of levels and is a monocrop that is not beneficial for pollinators. But there are some who want to start trying to grow more native plants, not only for the benefit of beneficial insects for their operation, but also just to actually break up the monotony of the monoculture and provide diversity. And then there's, a lot of projects that I've worked on public land as well. I've done some growing out native plants and providing seed for restoration projects on Forest Service land in mainly the Applegate Valley in Southwest Oregon, where certain sites were designated for pollinator habitat restoration projects. And then a lot of small restoration organizations here will also do, pile and thinning and burning. And then those burn pile areas are actually great for getting native seeds established. So when my husband was younger, he owned a forestry company, and they would do non-commercial forest restoration, thinning and pile burning around home sites for fire and fuels issues. And they would take all the burn piles and they would seed a lot of them if the property owner was interested, and increase the pollinator plants and the plant diversity on the land by seeding into those burn pile scars. So there's lots of opportunities to use native plants in various different types of projects, and that's one of the things that I think we should just be thinking of in general, is that, there's, native plants can be incorporated into various different types of projects and endeavors. So, I'm working right now actually with Tom Landis on putting in a monarch waste station at the new I-5 rest stop near Ashland. So that will be a new place that should be planted soon. That will be a new location that people will be able to also see native plant garden and monarch waste station.
It's great. I was at the Oregon Vegetation Management Association meeting in Seaside this year, in October last year, and I had one of the ODOT employees come up to me with a sign, and he said, "This is where," and it was really remarkable. It was really nice to see, and especially with organizations like SOMA, having a community partner, having some knowledge. And we actually had an episode with somebody from ODOT at the same time. They really like those kinds of partnerships where there's a community group, ODOT, and someone with some knowledge of the plant community. That's a really winning combination.
Yeah, and it goes to show that you can incorporate native plants into all kinds of different locations, and it doesn't have to just be large scale restoration on public land. I mean, those projects are really, really valuable, and large scale projects on private land as well. I'm working with another woman right now who wants to, do a pollinator meadow, native plant meadow in Ashland as well. But there's small projects, even just taking one garden bed in your backyard and turning it into native plants can make a big difference. And so I always encourage people to, just start small, and from there, you'll learn a lot, and you can just keep increasing native plants and just keep making them part of your garden. Or, if you are a land manager and you work on you manage land on a large scale, then definitely, taking the opportunities wherever possible to incorporate native seed and native plants for habitat restoration.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for taking time out. It was a very busy season for you, and I'm looking forward to coming down and seeing some of those projects when we can. Hopefully soon.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, as soon as we can. Sounds good.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Anthony. Bye.
All right. Thank you so much for listening. The show is produced by Quinn Sin and Neal, who's a student here at OSU in the New Media Communications program, and the show wouldn't even be possible without the support of the Oregon Legislature, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, and Western SARE. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on the website, which is at pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's several ways to connect with me. The first one is you can visit the website and leave an episode-specific comment. You can suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. But you can do the same things on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook by visiting the Oregon Bee Project. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.